Everyone heard the crash before they saw it. The sharp, sickening crunch of metal and glass cutting through the morning quiet, like a gunshot. At exactly 8:17 a.m., Bethany Kruger's pristine white Mercedes dangled behind a tow truck in full view of the neighborhood. Half the residents stood at their driveways with coffee mugs in hand, filming on their phones, whispering like witnesses at a public execution. 3 hours earlier, that same woman had taken a crowbar to my brand new Camaro. $40,000. Of dreams, the smell of fresh leather, the hum of a 455 horsepower V8, 2 years of overtime work shattered into glittering shards on my driveway. She thought she was ending my pride. She had no idea. She was ending her own empire. While she smashed through my paint and glass, I was smashing through her life, gathering bank records, forged documents, proof of embezzlement, and in 12 minutes, the police would be here to arrest her for felony fraud. But before we get to that moment, you need to know how this war began. 6 months ago, I was just a regular guy, trying to rebuild from the worst year of my life. 52, newly divorced, scraping by as an electrician in suburban Dallas. My ex-wife got the house, the dog, and half my retirement. I got a modest settlement, and the promise of starting over in Willowbrook Estates, a neighborhood where every lawn looked cloned and every smile was just polite enough to hide the gossip. I thought, I'd bought peace. I was wrong. The first thing I did with the scraps of my settlement was buy the one thing. I'd always wanted: a rally, red 2024. Camaro SS. Every last cent went into it. The day I drove it home, windows down, summer air pouring in, I felt something I hadn't in years. Whole again. That feeling lasted 3 days. On day 4, she appeared. Bethany Kruger, HOA president for 6 years, and self-appointed queen of Willowbrook Estates, the kind of woman who could turn a bake sale into a hostile takeover. Blonde bob that never moved in the wind, business casual outfits that cost more than my monthly mortgage, and a white Mercedes she treated like a holy relic. Her lawn looked like it had been rolled out of a factory, perfect, uniform, soulless, and the first thing she handed me was a violation notice. My black mailbox clashed with community standards, $18.9 for a brown one that did exactly the same job. That was the start. Then came the weekly fines. Grass, a hair too tall. A garden hose improperly stored. Oil stains. From my work truck. She stood at her kitchen window with arms folded, a smug smile on her lips, like she was conducting a private symphony of harassment. And then, she went after my Camaro. The first HOA meeting I attended, she looked right at me and said, "That vehicle is inappropriate for our community standards." The fluorescent lights hummed like angry wasps, while her board for middle-aged bobbleheads nodded at every word. "Sports cars project an undesirable image," she announced. Her citation was a $200 fine and a threat to put a lien on my home if I didn't remedy the situation. That night, I stayed up until 3 a.m., reading every word of the HOA covenants. What I found made my blood run hot. She was selectively enforcing rules that didn't even exist. At the next meeting, I laid out my research. Calm, factual, airtight. She smiled that predator smile and said, "Some people just don't understand that rules exist for a reason, Darius. Perhaps you'd be happier in a different type of neighborhood." The tone was obvious. The board voted against me 4-1. She wasn't trying to enforce rules. She was trying to push me out. 1 week later, I walked outside to find my Camaro keyed, from headlight to taillight. Deep gouges down to bare metal, not random, not careless. Surgical destruction. The police shrugged. Probably kids. It wasn't kids. That night, my elderly neighbor Martha called me over. Curtains drawn, voice trembling, she whispered, "I saw who did it. It was her boy Trevor. Snuck around your driveway at midnight with something metal in his hand." I asked if she'd testify. She wouldn't. Bethany had destroyed other neighbors for less. That was when I realized this wasn't about a car, it was about power. And unlike her other victims, I wasn't going anywhere. I installed a high-end dash cam system with motion activation and night vision, hidden from the streets. I wired every angle of my driveway like I was protecting Fort Knox. 3 nights later, at 2:17 a.m., the cameras caught something that made my stomach drop and my rage burn. It wasn't her kid this time. It was Bethany, crouched by my Camaro with a landscaping edger from the community shed, carving into my rear quarter panel like she was signing her name. Perfect nails gripping the handle. 3-carat wedding ring catching the streetlight, smiling as she worked. I stayed inside. My lawyer's words echoed in my head. Emotion destroys evidence. I let the camera drink in every second of her crime. The footage was damning, but I knew how the local cops worked. Bethany was untouchable, the kind of untouchable that comes from hosting the mayor's barbecue and donating to local campaigns. If I moved too soon, she'd wriggle free. So I waited and started pulling on threads that would unravel everything. The letter came the next afternoon, delivered by certified mail, like it was some official proclamation from the Queen herself. Emergency violation notice bold, underlined, and dripping with bureaucratic arrogance. Unauthorized vehicle modifications detected. Aftermarket exhaust system violates community noise ordinances per section 4.7b. Vehicle must be returned to factory specifications or removed from property within 48 hours. Failure to comply will result in immediate towing at owner's expense, plus administrative fees. She'd failed to destroy my car in the dead of night, so now she was trying to steal it through paperwork. The ink smelled like desperation and cheap perfume, but while she thought she was tightening her noose, I'd already found the bolt cutters. That evening, Martha came to my door again, this time with a name that made my pulse quicken. Edgar Williams, she whispered like it was the answer to a riddle. He's back in town, and he's been waiting years for someone like you. We met in a dingy coffee shop 30 minutes outside the neighborhood, the kind where the air tastes of burned beans and old secrets. Edgar was all sharp angles and hollow eyes, a man worn thin by carrying too much truth. She didn't just steal from the HOA, he said, sliding a thick manila folder across the table. She's been running a full-blown embezzlement scheme for at least 3 years. Fake invoices, shell companies, purchases that never happened. Minimum 45 grand, probably more. The folder was a treasure chest of poison. Forged contractor bills, bank statements, payment trails leading to companies that existed only on paper. And there, in black ink, the most damning document, a business registration for Maintenance Solutions under Bethany's maiden name, listing her home as its headquarters. Every month, thousands funneled through fake landscaping contracts. The timing matched her Mercedes payments perfectly. I tried to blow the whistle, Edgar said. Went to the cops, the state attorney, even the local news. That's when she came after me. Fake roof violations, bogus safety reports, insurance canceled. She ran me out of my own home. I stared at the papers, each one a nail in her coffin. She'd been using her HOA presidency as a personal ATM, protecting herself with intimidation and destroying anyone who got too close to the truth, but she'd made one fatal mistake. She came after someone with nothing left to lose and a skill set that could document every crime she'd ever committed. I spread Edgar's evidence across my kitchen table that night under the harsh glare of my work light. It was all here, the fake companies, the forged receipts, the fraudulent payments, enough to sink her 10 times over. Tomorrow, she'd expect me to hand over my Camaro like a beaten dog. Instead, she was about to watch her kingdom burn. I set 3 alarms for 6 a.m., my phone charging next to the printed security footage of her destroying my car. For the first time since moving to Willowbrook, I went to bed smiling. The next morning's air was cool, sharp and heavy with the promise of justice. I was sipping black coffee on my porch when Officer Rodriguez pulled into my driveway. He had the weary patience of a man who'd seen too many petty disputes, and probably didn't know yet that this was anything but petty. I handed him the photos. The video footage, crystal clear. Bethany crouched at my car, carving into the paint with a community tool like she was signing her work. Rodriguez whistled low. This is solid. But between neighbors, property damage like this rarely sticks in court. Unless there's blood or big money involved, the DA won't care. Before I could answer, I heard the staccato click of designer heels on pavement. Bethany emerged like a stage actor hitting her mark. Cream-colored suit, leather portfolio in hand, and that faux-concerned expression she probably practiced in the mirror. Officer Rodriguez, she breathed, hand to chest. Thank God you're here. I've been terrified about our troubled new resident. And just like that, she launched into her performance photos of me checking the mail, washing my car, trimming hedges. Normal, everyday things twisted into surveillance and intimidation. Her voice trembled with fake vulnerability, painting herself as the lone, endangered woman next door to a dangerous man. I didn't say a word. I just smiled. When she finally paused to breathe, I thanked her for her commitment to neighborhood safety, and explained that my cameras were there to protect everyone's property from vandalism. That flicker of confusion in her eyes was worth everything. She'd come expecting an explosion. Instead, I handed her calm, and calm terrified her. Rodriguez left with a shrug, suggesting we work it out. Bethany lingered, expecting me to crack. I closed my door in her face. She didn't know it yet, but I was already gathering the army that would end her reign. That night, Martha brought reinforcements to other victims of Bethany's reign of terror. And then James Crawford dropped the piece of information that made my pulse race. My brother Rico owns the towing company your HOA contracts with, he said. Beth's been authorizing tows for months, and not paying for them. She owes him $3,800 and unpaid towing fees. They put liens on the owner's vehicle, the white Mercedes, her shrine, her weak spot. By 7 a.m. the next morning, Rico and I would be ready. Bethany's ultimatum on my Camaro expired at 8, and this time, she wasn't the hunter. The dawn before a storm always feels different, colder, quieter, like the world knows something's about to break. At 7 a.m., Rico Crawford's tow truck rumbled into my neighborhood like a steel predator on the hunt. Diesel engine idling low, massive wind charm gleaming in the pale light. It parked legally on the public street, right where Bethany would see it the moment she stepped outside. She emerged 15 minutes later, wearing a white bathrobe that probably cost more than most people's rent. Her hair was perfect, but her eyes darted like a cornered animal's. She saw the truck, froze, pulled out her phone. Even from my porch, I could hear the sharp, panicked rhythm of her voice. Within minutes, her front door became a revolving stage. Board members hurried inside for what Martha, who was stationed across the street with binoculars, texted me was lots of shouting, lawyers mentioned. While she tried to assemble her defense team, Rico and I reviewed our plan. He wasn't just here to collect on an unpaid debt. He was here with documentation that could burn her entire operation to the ground. At 7:15, she burst from her house wearing a tailored suit that screamed, "I'm in control." But her stride toward Rico's truck carried the stiff, jerky movements of someone holding themselves together with willpower alone. "You need to move this truck immediately," she demanded. The authority in her voice strained, brittle. "This is private property. You're trespassing." Rico climbed down from the cab with the deliberate calm of a man who'd been yelled at by every kind of entitled client imaginable. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "I'm on a public street, here, to collect $3,800 in unpaid invoices for towing services your HOA ordered." Bethany's expression cycled through panic, disbelief, dismissal. "That's impossible. Our treasurer handles payments. There must be some mistake." "No mistake," Rico said, pulling a thick folder from his truck like a magician producing the final card in a trick, "all signed by you. 18 months of work, and here's the best part. Your HOA bank statements show payments made to Crawford Towing Solutions." That company ring a bell. The color drained from her face. I knew exactly why, because Crawford Towing Solutions wasn't Rico's company. It was her sister's fake business, the shell she'd been funneling payments into. The air between them hummed with tension. That's when Officer Rodriguez pulled up, probably responding to her 911 call. He stepped out with that same weary neutrality, but as soon as he saw the folder in Rico's hands and the Mercedes in her driveway, his eyes sharpened. Bethany launched straight into her victim act. "Officer, this man is harassing me, blocking my property, making threats over money. We don't—" "Oh," Rico cut her off, his voice as calm as a surgeon's. "Everything is documented. Invoices, bank records, proof of fraud." He handed Rodriguez the folder. Rodriguez flipped through, his eyebrows lifting fractionally at the signatures, the dates, the money trails. Bethany's voice faltered for the first time since she'd stepped outside, and then the cavalry arrived. Martha, holding her own manila envelope thick with insurance fraud records. Edgar, clutching years of financial evidence. Helen Morrison, a retired teacher Bethany had run out of the neighborhood, standing tall beside them. James Crawford, 3 other neighbors who had been too afraid to speak until now. They walked toward Rodriguez together, not fast, not hesitant, just steady, determined. "Officer," Martha said, her voice like a bell, "we have additional information on financial misconduct. You'll want to see this." Bethany's face froze, and for the first time, I saw it, not the smug confidence, not the fake warmth, but the raw animal fear of someone watching the walls close in. Rodriguez took the envelope. His demeanor shifted. Gone was the civil referee. Now, he was all business. The way a man looks when he realizes the case in front of him is no longer small-town politics. It's criminal. The quiet was thick, charged, the kind of silence where everyone's breath sinks without trying. And then, like the first crack of thunder before a storm, Martha said the words that would detonate the morning. "We can prove she's been using her HOA presidency to commit embezzlement, insurance fraud, and harassment for years." Bethany blinked rapidly, her lips parting. But no sound came out. She knew. Everyone in earshot knew. The Queen of Willowbrook was no longer in control of the board, the narrative, or her fate. And she had no idea that the next 20 minutes were going to strip her crown off in front of the entire neighborhood and half the county. By 7:45 a.m., our quiet suburban cul-de-sac had transformed into a powder keg, the diesel purr of Rico's tow truck mixed with the low hum of neighbors gathering, whispering, filming. Bethany stood in her driveway, perfectly pressed suit already, showing creases of panic, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. She jabbed at the screen, speaking in that clipped urgent tone reserved for when someone thinks their connections will save them. "Mayor Davidson, this is Bethany Kruger, from Willowbrook Estates. I need immediate intervention to stop this media circus from destroying our community's reputation." Her voice carried across the street, and so did the reply. Even from 20 feet away, I could hear the mayor's aide deliver the death sentence. "The mayor's office doesn't interfere in civil HOA disputes." Bethany froze, the color draining from her face like water slipping down a drain. But she wasn't done. Her desperation just got uglier. "Officer," she said to Rodriguez, lowering her voice, but not enough to hide the venom, "certain city officials have arrangements with our association. This harassment could have serious political consequences for everyone involved." Rodriguez's jaw tightened. I could see at the exact moment he decided she wasn't just a problem, she was a liability. Then her so-called allies arrived. 3 board members, summoned by her frantic calls, walked up like rats fleeing a burning ship. They took one look at the evidence laid out on Rico's truck bed and started bailing on her. Instantly, I never saw any of these invoices. Jennifer Walsh, the secretary, said loudly enough for the growing crowd. Bethany always claimed the treasurer handled all financials. Tom Rodriguez, another board member, stepped forward, voice cracking with self-preservation. We were told these expenses were routine. Nobody showed us actual contracts. Every word was another knife. In her back, you could almost see her calculating who she'd take down with her, and realizing it wouldn't matter. And then she made the wildest move yet. Bethany called Channel 8 News. Apparently, she thought she could control the narrative by getting ahead of the story, but she didn't know. Sarah Kim, our lawyer, had already briefed their lead investigative reporter. The news van rolled in just as the sun broke over the rooftops, camera lenses catching the glint of her Mercedes, the crowd of neighbors, the tow truck, the officers. Lisa Martinez stepped out, an investigative shark with 3 Emmys for exposing HOA corruption. She had a folder under her arm and the kind of smile that says, "I already know how this ends." Her first question was a surgical strike. "Mrs. Kruger, would you care to comment on documented allegations that you've embezzled over $1,000 from community funds while using your position to intimidate residents into silence?" Bethany's jaw worked like she'd forgotten how words functioned. The cameras didn't look away. Neither did the crowd, now swelling past 40 neighbors, many with phones raised, recording every second. Then Edgar stepped forward, briefcase in hand, looking like he'd been waiting years for this exact moment. His voice was steady, deliberate. "I have 3 years of bank statements proving systematic theft. This woman destroyed my life to cover up her crimes." Bethany glanced around, searching for some ally, some escape. There wasn't one. That's when Officer Rodriguez's voice cut through the murmurs. Calm, measured, final. "Dispatch, I need detectives and federal investigators at Willowbrook Estates immediately. We have evidence of mail fraud, embezzlement, racketeering, and conspiracy involving potential municipal corruption." The words federal investigators landed like a grenade. Bethany staggered back a step, eyes darting to her house, calculating if she could get inside before anyone stopped her. But behind her, Rico's tow truck shifted into position, the hook lowering toward her precious Mercedes with all the finality of a guillotine blade. The crowd held its breath. She was seconds away from watching her shrine. 2 stolen money get lifted, off the ground in front of every person she'd ever tried to intimidate. And the best part? We weren't even at the good part yet. The metallic clank of Rico's tow hook locking onto her Mercedes was the sound of justice, pure, unfiltered, and loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. Bethany's head whipped toward the truck, eyes wide, lips trembling. "Can't touch that car," she shouted, her voice cracking under the weight of panic. Rico didn't even look up from his work. "Ma'am, your vehicle is subject to immediate impoundment for unpaid liens totaling $4,200 plus interest. Documentation's in the glove box of my truck if you'd like to read it while I finish." The hydraulic lift groaned, raising the gleaming white symbol of her reign off the ground. Cameras flashed, phones recorded, and the crowd, now swelling to more than 60 people, murmured, like they were witnessing a miracle. Bethany let out a sound I'd never heard from a human throat, somewhere between a banshee's wail and a death rattle. It cut through the diesel rumble, through the shuffle of the crowd, through everything. Federal investigators had just arrived, unmarked sedans pulling in with the quiet authority of people who didn't need to announce themselves. They stepped out, badges flashing, expressions hard. County prosecutors followed, carrying files fat enough to hold her entire criminal history. Bethany looked like she might collapse right there on her driveway. Her perfectly tailored suit couldn't hide the sweat stains spreading under her arms. And still, she tried to seize control. She grabbed a microphone from the news crew and climbed onto her porch railing like some desperate, unhinged politician making a last-ditch campaign speech. "Neighbors, friends," she cried, voice breaking, "what you're seeing is a coordinated attack on our community by outside agitators who want to destroy everything we've built together." The crowd erupted, not in support, but in G. "What about this stolen money?" "Bethany," someone shouted, "tell us about your sister's fake towing company." Another yelled. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped the microphone. I walked forward, calm, measured, every step deliberate. 3 years ago, I began, my voice carrying over the crowd. This woman started stealing from our community. She used her position to ruin anyone who questioned her. We have proof of $75,000 in embezzled funds, insurance fraud, and fake companies designed to launder our money. Bethany tried to cut me off. "These are lies." But I lifted my phone, showing the crystal clear footage of her crouched by my Camaro, carving into the paint in the dead of night. "You want to talk about lies?" I said, my voice hardening. "Here's you, 2:17 a.m., vandalizing my car with a community tool. Here's your signature on fraudulent invoices. Here's testimony from contractors you never paid and residents you drove out of their homes." The crowd's applause rolled through the street like thunder. Martha stepped up beside me, voice shaking but strong. She canceled my insurance with false reports, forced me to choose between losing my home or fighting lies I couldn't prove. Edgar's turn. She buried me under fake violations when I tried to audit the finances, made my life hell until I had no choice but to flee. One by one, the victims stepped forward. Their stories painted a picture of years of systemic abuse, so detailed and consistent it left no room for doubt. Bethany shrank with every word. shoulders folding inward, face tight with the realization that her power, her weapon, had been dismantled in full view of everyone she'd ever ruled over. And then Federal Agent Martinez stepped forward, handcuffs in one hand, warrant in the other. "Bethany Morrison Kruger," he said, his voice crisp. "You're under arrest for mail fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement, and racketeering under federal RICO statutes." The Miranda rights echoed through Willowbrook Estates, and for the first time in years, the air didn't feel heavy. It felt clean. The crowd exploded into cheers. Kids pressed their faces to school bus windows. Parents recorded from porches. And as Bethany was led away, hands bound, Rico's tow truck lifted her Mercedes high into the air, swaying gently in the morning light like the final trophy of a battle well fought. It was over, but the aftermath, that would be even sweeter. The sound of her Mercedes swaying in the tow rig was still echoing in my head when the federal sedans rolled away with Bethany in the back seat. For the first time since I'd moved to Willowbrook, the street felt light. People were laughing. Actual, genuine laughter, as if a weight had been cut from all our shoulders at once. Neighbors who'd barely made eye contact before were clapping each other on the back, swapping stories, realizing they'd all been living the same nightmare, in silence. Officer Rodriguez closed his notepad and gave the most satisfying final words I'd ever heard. "Suspect is in federal custody. Community threat neutralized. Investigation ongoing." It was over, but the real victory was still months ahead. 6 months later, I sat in my driveway, watching kids ride bikes where no one had dared let them before. Martha was tending her flowers. Without fear of a citation, Edgar waved from across the street, no longer the hunched, haunted man I'd met in that dingy coffee shop. The transformation was breathtaking. Bethany's sentencing hearing had been a masterpiece of justice. Federal Judge Patricia Williams didn't bother with politeness. 3 years in federal prison, 5 years probation, full restitution, $127,000, including interest, penalties, and legal fees. No early release, no house arrest, no country club. Privileges. Bethany Kruger, the woman who thought she was untouchable, was now wearing an orange jumpsuit and serving real time. Every single day of her sentence was another day of justice for someone she'd wronged, and the money. Turns out, her arrogance was her undoing. She'd never drained all the accounts. The frozen HOA funds held not only what she'd stolen, but years of accumulated interest. The sale of her house at auction brought in enough to renovate every neglected common area in the neighborhood. My Camaro was restored to showroom condition thanks to a community fundraiser that doubled the repair costs in under a week. The extra cash started a neighborhood legal defense fund, a war chest for the future, making sure no HOA board could ever pull the same tricks again. The new board streamed every meeting live. Financials were posted quarterly. Major decisions required community votes. Edgar was elected treasurer by unanimous vote, and his first act was implementing audit procedures that made embezzlement virtually impossible. Rico's towing business exploded after the story went national. Now, he was the go-to contractor for honest boards across the state. Sarah Kim, our attorney, became a legend in HOA reform, her courtroom wins cited in legislation in 3 states. The ripple effect was massive. 12 other HOAs requested voluntary audits. State legislators passed the Willowbrook Act, requiring annual financial transparency and background checks for all board members. We even turned the anniversary of Bethany's arrest into a festival. Food trucks, music, educational booths about homeowner rights. The first year raised $15,000 for a legal aid scholarship helping low-income families fight HOA abuse. We run it from the old community center, once Bethany's war room, now a place for kids, art classes, and weekend cookouts. But the most satisfying change was personal. My business thrived from word-of-mouth referrals, not just because I was an electrician, but because I was the guy who'd stood up to the bully no one else could touch. I'd helped 3 other neighborhoods expose corruption since yesterday. The phone rang again. A homeowner 2 counties over, voice shaking with fear but edged with hope. "I heard what happened in Willowbrook. Can you help us?" I looked out at our street, the bikes, the gardens, the neighbors waving, and smiled. "We're on our way," I told them, "because some fights are worth having, and some victories. They don't just belong to you, they belong to everyone who's still waiting for their own giant to fall." The phone call from that desperate homeowner wouldn't leave my mind. Her voice had that same tremble Martha's had when she first told me about Trevor scratching my car. That same mix of fear and exhaustion I'd heard in Edgar's coffee shop. Confession. And I realized something. What happened in Willowbrook wasn't just a win for us. It was a blueprint. A blueprint for anyone living under the thumb of a petty tyrant with a title. Whether they sat on an HOA board, a council seat, or just thought the rules bent for them alone. I told the woman, "We'll bring our legal defense network. We'll bring the documentation playbook. We'll bring the cameras. And if they're dirty, we'll expose them like we exposed Bethany." Her breath hitched, like she'd been holding it for years. "Thank you," she whispered, after I hung up. I walked outside and took in what we'd built from the ashes of her downfall. Martha's flower beds bursting in colors no violation notice could ever erase. Edgar walking his dog without a single sideways glare from a compliance officer. Kids' laughter bouncing off houses that no longer hid fear behind their doors. We'd gone from scattered, intimidated individuals to a united front, and unity changes everything. I thought about the night Bethany crouched by my Camaro, carving lines into it with that smug little smile. How badly I'd wanted to burst out of the house, drag her away, and let my rage speak for me. If I'd done that, she might still be in power. The truth was ugly, but simple. Emotion without proof loses battles, but patience wins wars. That's the real lesson here. Sometimes justice isn't about yelling louder than the bully. It's about quietly building the case until there's nowhere left for them to run. And when that moment comes, you don't just win for yourself. You win for everyone they've ever hurt. Everyone's still too scared to fight. And everyone watching from the sidelines wondering if it's even possible. It is because we proved it. And now, every time I hear a new story of HOA corruption, I don't just see another fight. I see another chance to send a message. To every Bethany out there, your time is running out. 6 months after the Banya, our neighborhood still feels different in ways you can't measure on paper. The air itself is lighter. Doors stay open a little longer. People wave instead of pretending they didn't see you. Kids ride bikes in the middle of the street without their parents scanning the sidewalks for a certain blonde bob in the window. We didn't just get our money back. We got our peace back. And maybe that's the part Bethany never understood. You can find people, threaten them, humiliate them, but you can't erase the way neighbors remember. The moment they stood together. Every time I see my restored Camaro gleaming in the driveway, I think of that morning, of the tow hook lifting her Mercedes into the air, of the crowd's roar when the handcuffs clicked shut, of the way fear vanished from 60 people all at once. That's why our Community Freedom Festival isn't just a party. It's a reminder. The bouncy houses, the food trucks, the live music, they're all built on the same truth. When good people unite, bad people lose. I've kept every scrap of evidence from our fight, not out of spite, but as a teaching tool. We run homeowner workshops out of the old community center, showing people how to read their bylaws, demand financial transparency, and spot the red flags before they turn into nightmares. And when someone says, yeah, but my HOA president is untouchable, I just pull up the footage of Bethany at 2:17 a.m., carving her own downfall into my Camaro's paint. If you've got your own Bethany, here's what I want you to remember. Document everything, build your case, find allies, and when the moment's right, strike so hard they can't get back up. That's not revenge. That's justice. If you've ever been on the wrong end of HOA abuse, tell your story in the comments. The more we share, the stronger we get. And if this story made you cheer, laugh, or shake your head at how far one person will go to protect their power, hit that like button and subscribe. Because this isn't the end. Somewhere out there, another neighborhood's living their own version of Willowbrook. And when they're ready, we'll be there. Cameras rolling, evidence in hand, and a tow truck rumbling in the distance. Sometimes David doesn't just beat Goliath, he inspires an entire army. Asterisk, you've heard this confession. Now wait until you hear the next one.